All right, everybody, welcome back to Scar Stories. My name is Nicole Golden, your host, and I would love it if you took some time to go on Apple Podcasts or SoundCloud and just write us a review and let us know what you've been enjoying and how much you've been enjoying it. That would be awesome. But if you'd like to get caught up on some of the other episodes, you can also go to my website, NicoleGolden.org. We've got them all listed there. But I have back one of our favorite guests, Dr. Kevin Hull. Kevin is my personal counselor / therapist, however you want to refer to it. I have been seeing Kevin for 10 plus years, probably now. I lose track. But anyways, next to my relationship with my husband, my kids, and Jesus, like Kevin's like one of the most important people in my life. So I am honored for you guys to be able to get to know him some. And we're going to talk about something that's, I don't know. I don't know if it's like a sensitive topic. I'm not sure, but I know something that a lot of people have questions about, and a lot of people are walking through, specifically over the past year or so, I'm going to guess, or even considering, and that is the topic of drumroll, divorce. So we're going to jump right into it. And I threw Kevin for a loop because we were going to talk about a totally different topic that I had forgotten because I'd booked him a while ago. Kevin's a busy man. And then this morning I was like, I really want to talk to Kevin about divorce and remarriage. So I sent him a text and I was like, can I turn this whole thing around on you? And like the good sport he is, he's like, let's do it. So here we go. You guys are going to hear an authentic conversation because we both just looked at these questions today. All right, Kevin. So, and if you guys want to find out more about Kevin and his personal life, you can listen to the first podcast we did. Just scroll through there for the interview with Dr. Kevin Hull, and you can hear a little bit more because we're just going to jump right into the juicy stuff. All right, Kevin. So just refresh us. You've been a counselor practicing all of this for how many years?
This is my 25th year in the counseling field.
Okay.
And my 18th year as a professor. And so, yeah, lots of experiences on both sides of teaching plus counseling practice. So
Yes.
Thank you again for having me.
Absolutely. And I asked that because you've seen so many different people. And my first question kind of goes off of that is when you see people who have just recently divorced or in the process of walking through a divorce, how are they feeling mentally and emotionally? And so I want to, what I'm hoping people will take away from this discussion is that those who are walking through a divorce, have just been divorced, they will find comfort and encouragement. And then those who are not going through a divorce, have not been divorced, will know how to interact and walk through that sort of a scenario with a close friend. Because I think sometimes, especially if you've grown up in a home like I have, where divorce is like one of the cardinal sins, like we don't know how to interact. And do we be supportive of someone who wants to go through a divorce, or is that something we're like, no, you just grind it out? So I'm hoping this conversation is twofold for people. So when they get to the point where they're in your office talking to you and they've just gone through divorce, how are they feeling emotionally and mentally?
Great question. Three themes come to my mind. They're usually there's shame, there's guilt, from a sense of failure, from a sense of loss. And, typically when we're going through stress, we tend to blame ourselves. We see it as a self-focused weakness.
Yeah.
But then also just fatigue, just tired. And so the judgment of others on top of that, throws a layer. And you and I grew up in similar theological backgrounds. And I remember as a boy, people openly judging those who were divorced. It was kind of a whispered, they're divorced, and or that's a divorced person.
Yes.
And also the idea that the person who somehow their faith wasn't strong enough, all of these judgments that happened a lot in those churches where there was that legalistic mindset. So, and I'll be honest, I am a divorced person and I am a remarried person. So I've gone through this
Yeah.
personally, not only helping people in counseling, and, shattered my world. And, it was growing up that way. It was suddenly, here I am in this situation, and, this isn't supposed to happen.
Yeah.
This isn't God's will. This isn't, how this is supposed to turn out. And so it's been quite a journey of recovery and healing, and also perspective shifting. So, in fact, there's been, some churches I was a part of, I would be considered unfit for service,
Yeah.
because,
I laugh because it's just,
and
yes. Yeah. Unfit for
and
the ministry. Yeah.
and over the years, I've witnessed, really great, wise people resigning from deacon boards and resigning from church leadership because of a rebellious teenager in their family that they couldn't control, which was not their fault. These were
Yeah.
good parents and good people.
Yeah.
So, there's that element. And so I love the thrust of this, that let's give people some perspective, both those going through it and those who look at it from the outside, because until I experienced this, even though I had training, even though I helped families through it, until I went through it personal, there were things that I didn't see
Yeah.
within the process. So
Yeah. And I think like it's interesting that you said, the feelings of failure, and that was a question we have later, but we'll just hop over it. Because I was just having a conversation with someone, and they said, in fact, her story is airing on Scar Stories here soon, Brandy Wilson, but her husband was a big time pastor in the Nashville area, and um, out of nowhere walked away from the church, their marriage, their three boys. And she admitted to, like, you go through this moment of feeling like, what did I do? Like, how did I cause this? Like, here was this, godly man who was like writing books and leading people to the Lord. And so there must have been something wrong with me. So is that a common thing where people just come in and blame themselves? Even people who have probably done everything they possibly can to save the marriage, they're just blaming themselves for what happened.
correct. The brain tends to tie outcomes that we can't control and that don't turn out the way we want. There's kind of an autobiographical bent to those. Not everyone does this, but it's very common to only remember the things that I couldn't fix or save or do. And often there's a complete, forgetting.
Yeah.
So part of the work that I do is in having them rewrite their narrative of not only looking at the hard stuff, but also looking at, where did you try? Where did you
Yeah.
put your effort? Where did you do all that you could? And then that leads to the process of acceptance, which is an important part of any grieving process.
Yeah. And you said too, a few seconds ago, that there were things that you learned walking through it personally and experiencing it personally that you wouldn't have been able to learn just from sitting on the other side, of the couch or the table or whatever. And so what were some of those things that were shocking to you as you walked through it personally, that you're like, dang, I never took this into consideration before I had experienced this myself?
Yeah, well, the process in general, is a loss of the familiar. So very often it means the end of a shared living space. It means the end of a routine. It means the end of certain rituals, putting the kids to bed, bathing the children, meal times. And so fear, terror steps in. Perhaps one of the deepest and most devastating things is the financial destruction that
Yes.
often accompanies. And so that type of loss strips us to our fundamental needs of safety and security and survival. So
Yeah. Yeah.
the fear, and then the loss of friendships, because the dynamic of friendships change. Some people, because of their upbringing or background, can't handle being friends with a divorced person, or they think that if my husband, who's friends with this guy, if they hang out, oh, I know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
And, and I don't want his kids with my kids. So I lost friendships. And that was a whole new thing to me. That was devastating
Mm.
because it was like I had this cancer.
Mm.
And, their kids are going to catch it from my kids.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
Wow.
that was just really eye-opening. And, but yeah, a lot of fear. And then just the deep pain of grief and loss.
Because would you liken it to because you've lost your mom lost her battle to cancer several years ago, so you've walked through death, and is a divorce very similar to a death, would you say?
Yes, the stress and the experiences are very much multi-layered losses. It's almost worse in a way if you talk to people who've been through it.
Really?
Because
How so?
because the points of closure are so spread out. My girls were very small when this happened. So thinking of all that they were not going to have, and then projecting into the future, what about when they're in middle school, when they're in high school, when they're young adults? How is this going to manifest in their life? And it's like growing a fruit tree, but not going to get fruit for 18 years and just hoping it's working. And so that creates the lack of closure to things. And so that's where I try to help people see it as a process to stay in the moment. What's the next thing I got to do? Unload the dishes. Then what? Get ready for work. Then what? Drive the kids to school, and staying in right here, right now helps me see not only the grace of God that filters down through, that beautiful lens, but also managing my energy to things that I can't control are outside of this moment. Let me just focus here. But it's a marathon of pain. And we don't like pain, and most people don't run marathons. So it's for those of you out there, going through this, conceptualizing that it's going to be a long process helps. In a way, it can be discouraging, but don't look for quick fixes. See it as a long process. And that's where divorce care, a good support system is so important.
I was going to ask about that.
And that requires the person going through it to speak up. One of the mistakes I made in I'm a silent sufferer. So it comes from being a counselor. It comes from, just, I don't want to burden anybody. I've already listened to all this stuff all day, but
which is funny because I'll never forget. I texted you at one point because I was like, I was struggling one day, and I sent you a few texts and you weren't responding. And all of a sudden I'm just recovering from getting my appendix out and I'm still in the hospital bed. I'm like, dude, this would have been great to know, it's just so funny. So yes, I can testify to that. Yes. You don't usually hear about Kevin in the middle of anything until he's in the middle of it.
Yeah. So I had to learn, in my girls' classes, there were great moms who were right there for me. And all I had to do was ask, hey, can you, take them home with you today? I'm working a little later, or in recovery in the divorce care part, reaching out to a group. I did a quick Google search this morning. Because one of your questions was, support.
Yes.
And sure enough, a local church right here in Lakeland, Victory Church, has an ongoing divorce care support group. There's an actual organization called Divorce Care that puts on groups, but they're in a lot of churches, they're in a lot of places, and so that one's running from January to May. But it requires energy to seek out. And so one of the things that I would recommend people do is don't wait until you're to the point of emotional and physical and spiritual exhaustion and do it out of desperation. Take action. And we're going to talk a little bit later about a plan, but make that part of your care plan that, if I just got out of the hospital, would I be expected to do all the chores that no, I'm expected to rest. I'm expected to set limits. And
Yeah.
so it's that same kind of thing.
And so I'm just trying to put myself in that spot. Because after, walking through the trauma of 2019 and, looking for community and having people surround, you're so emotionally depleted. And I think like you feel so vulnerable. How do you muster the strength to just be like, okay, I've just got to put myself out there one more time? Or even like, if I go to this divorce care group, this means I'm accepting what happened and I'm not ready for that. So is it just something you just have to force yourself into? Or, how do you talk yourself into that if you're just like, I'm not ready to accept it. I don't have the emotional vulnerability left. Like my margin is gone, you know?
Yeah. And that can be, remember, that can be just being good to yourself, giving
Yeah.
yourself permission to not do the dishes that night and simply just, take a bath,
Yeah.
or let a friend come over and cook for you. A lot of times, people are afraid to let their guard down and rely on another person because they're afraid they'll feel so, there's so much guilt anyway. But that also is a part of taking care of yourself. So, those groups aren't for everybody.
Yeah.
Sometimes people feel more overwhelmed because they're hearing stories or, but at least coming up with a plan of where are people taking care of me and how can I create space for that?
Yeah. I love that. How can I create space for that? I know like when I walked through losing my brother and then when we lost Bryant's mom, it was difficult to let people come in and do stuff for us. But I remember like as we did it, people they wanted to surround us. They wanted to be there for us. And as we allowed them to, it softens your heart a little bit, and it does just create this bond with those people. And it does give you the strength to know, okay, we're not alone in this. Someone may not understand, but they're with us in it. And so it's not the same sort of loss, but I can just speak out of a different sort of trauma of just humbling yourself and allowing people to come in. It is super powerful. Okay, so next question would be, I'm going to skip the plan question. We're going to come back to that. Let's go to the question about communicating to your kids. So I can't imagine how devastating that must be, sitting the kids down and communicating to your children, what's about to happen. And so what are some tips maybe you would give to someone who's going to have this conversation with their children or has had it and it didn't go well? And so now what do they do? So how would you speak into that?
Great. Yes. One of probably the biggest concerns is, the effect on the children and how
Yeah.
that's going to.
Oh, you muted yourself for a
So
second. You said the effect on the children and how that's going to.
affect them.
Yes.
So again, think of it as a process. So when our brain gets news, anything new, anything different, it hits the brain as a threat. It hits the brain as fear, triggers the fear-based thinking, the fear-based operation. So,
Whoopsie. We're frozen just for a second. Let's just figure out what's going on.
are going.
Oh, there you are. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
We froze for a second. Okay. So it said,
had a bit of a glitch.
I know, silly internet. Give me 1 second. I'm just going to, I think it might be mine. I'm going to switch over to a different one. So it may freeze again. So let's just take a second here and get it. There we go. All right. Are you there still? Okay.
Yep.
Okay. So you said anytime we
here.
get news, it triggers the fear-based part of the brain. That's
Correct.
What I heard.
So when children hear, that my parents are getting divorced, there's no context of meaning for that. There's no familiar space for their brain to go, oh, this and this and this happens. And they may have heard horror stories from kids at school or so the role of the parent is important, and how they handle that conversation is very important. So the first part is context. So here's what's going to happen. Mom and dad have decided, and if the parents can do it together, it's probably the best thing, even though it's not what the child wants to hear. But
Yeah.
it's framing, here's going to happen, and here's how life is going to change. And then getting the questions. So
Yeah.
I recommend play through the process with younger children, grabbing some stuffed animals, making some little stuffed animals. These two stuffed animals are going to live apart. And then the little ones, are going to be with this one, and then they're going to be with this one, but it's going to be different.
Yeah.
And then allowing the children to take those little animals and ask questions, or just look at it through a familiar form of play of these objects, so that questions can be asked, so that the context of expecting what is going to happen can be communicated. Obviously, with older children, with older teens, it's easier in a way because you can use verbal communication and things like that. But that's the basic process.
Yeah.
Be clear about what's going to happen. Have a plan of what's going to happen. Expectations, and then open it up for questions. What do you need to know? And then through it all is the reassurance that you're not losing us. You're going to lose the familiar of what you know, but love and relationship are going to continue. So, and in my experience, often children sort of know it's coming.
Yeah.
They
They're very
can feel
intuitive.
it. Even in homes where parents have said, no matter what, we're going to stay together for the kids, there's a lot of tension. And so often parents are surprised at the children's reactions. And one of the cliches that I really don't like that comes from my field is children are resilient. Well, they are.
Yeah.
Humans in general can deal with a lot, but I think part of the fear of parents is, what am I putting on my child? And so sending that message that we've talked about this, your dad and I, your mom and I have a plan. We're going to care for you. And then allowing space for just the questions and the release of emotions. Expect that, there will be, that will probably be part of the process. And so, and then checking in later on. Hey, we had that talk a few days ago. I'm wondering what you're feeling, what you're thinking.
Yeah.
Just that caring, that walking through it together.
Yeah. And I do think, would you agree, like being as honest with your children as their age would allow keeps them and taking the onus and responsibility on you as a parent, so that the child doesn't find a way to blame themselves for it, are there any other ways that parents can make sure that the child isn't blaming themselves? Or is that a myth? Is that just a myth that the children blame themselves in a divorce? Is that a myth, or is that a true situation?
It's common in situations where where there was a lot of fighting.
Okay.
A pattern of staying together but not doing it productively.
Okay.
Where the child was put in the place of needing to comfort or take care or fix it for the parents.
Phew.
So
Okay.
that is a true thing. And especially the type of child, like a firstborn who already feels a sense of responsibility, a very driven type A type child who's, very dynamic, lots of energy, very intelligent. Those kids tend to be more at risk for that, of self-blame, because they're used to just trying to make everything happen.
Yeah.
So just something to be aware of. But again, that can be part of the reassurance. This isn't your fault. This isn't, you didn't do anything wrong. Ironically, I find that a lot of kids, they don't like the overall thing of divorce, but one hidden benefit that they suddenly realize is kind of neat is for the first time in their life, they get dad to themselves.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, what does that say about our dads in the family system?
Yeah.
Dad's taking them to the doctor, dad's picking them up from school because it's his week or it's his, you know,
Yeah.
um, suddenly dad is around. Suddenly,
Yeah.
I had a whole weekend with my dad and we did some cool stuff.
Mm.
And so within the change, there can be these surprises and maybe they get special time with mom when she's not cooking, cleaning, running to the grocery
Mm.
store, these typical things that fall upon moms. For the first time in their life,
Mm.
they see their mom at Family Fun Center beating the heck out of the gopher game
Yeah.
and in the ball pit and like I didn't know my mom could run, and they're
Yeah.
at the park because mom's usually doing all these other things. So again,
Interesting.
silver linings, it
Yeah.
opens the door for one-on-one intimate relationships with the kids. And I'm telling you, that part, when parents are intentional about that relationship piece, not that they have to spend the whole Saturday, and not that they have to overcompensate, but just those strategic points of
Mm.
intentional relationship can help so much in the child's sense of healing and reassurance and that everything is okay. I
Mm.
can deal with this.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. What is it just as important for the kids to get a support system as it is for the parents? Or is it more important for the parent to for the parents as a team to really hunker down and be the support system for the kids? Like what should parents be looking for as far as support for the children?
Intentional relationships. So, 15 to 30 minutes, 3 or 4 times a week, of just play with
Yeah.
younger children, sitting on plunking on the floor and going, I'm yours for 30 minutes. What do you want to do?
Mhm.
And then with older kids and teens, checking in and setting up little dates, little times to get out of the house and go on walks and do things to make that an intentional process. Look for isolation and withdrawal
Mm.
when a teenager starts to not communicate, when they start to isolate, when they start to get alone a lot, even if
Yeah.
they're kind of a introverted kid. Those tend to be signs that there's something going on inside. They're struggling with something.
Mm.
So, and I'm not saying that every kid who goes through a divorce, needs to go to counseling,
Yeah.
but just to be watchful of those things,
Yeah.
to be
And I'm wondering
prepared.
too, like if, if they are a church going person, like getting the small group leader or the youth pastor involved or like a coach or something just to have, like make sure my kid's talking. If it's not to me, make sure, my kid is talking and
Great point.
yeah, and really
For
like
those,
communicating and
yeah, for those strategic, really key relationships like a swim coach, a youth pastor, even a special teacher to the child,
yeah.
setting up an individual session meeting and letting them know, hey, here's what's going on at home,
Mm.
just to be aware, not that you have to talk to them about it, but we just want you to know. That creates a blanket of insulation and security so that, let's say a coach sees a typical, kid who's really just goes at it, and all of a sudden they're just kind of lagging and they're just,
Mm.
that coach is going to be able to go, okay, yeah, I know this is what happens. Or a teacher sees a very calm child lash out at another kid at
Yeah.
school. They have a context of, okay, let me check in with them and see. So
Yeah.
that's part of that parental role that a lot of parents don't think about, because of the shame and guilt,
Mm.
um, and so, but I can tell you that really made a difference. And I believe, I've raised 4 kids. I've got, the blended family. So I've got
Yes.
stepsons and then my daughters, and everybody's adults now. And we've had many conversations about the journey. And so that was one of the factors that really helped in my personal situation, was the support of important adult figures who mattered to the children.
I love that. So you just mentioned blended family. So we'll end with blended family conversation and then the plan conversation. So talk to us a little bit about, if remarriage is in, part of the, planner journey for you, how to go about unifying a blended family. First of all, do you have any words of wisdom on, different people like to give, like, wait 2 years, wait 5 years. Do you have any words of wisdom on, from a divorce to a remarriage time, how much space, should there be space between those two things? Should you rush to remarry? I know some people panic and get lonely and afraid of doing it on their own. Or is that insensitive for us to be like, hey, maybe put a little pause?
Correct. And so I refrain from putting a time frame on it.
Okay.
Instead, I like to help people focus on, a basic idea that if you're getting into a new relationship to save yourself or to distract you from what you need to do, and not work on the stuff from that first time around, then that's not a good decision. You're not ready yet.
Yeah.
Because even though it feels good, you're going to drag a lot of the same stuff. And so part
Ryan
of what I
always
did,
says, everywhere you go, there you are. And I think that's so funny, because
yeah,
it's like, yeah, if you're not dealing with, and I
right,
think even being able to, what you said, walking through the grief process too, because I think if you don't, this is just, I don't know. And I feel funny even speaking into this. So correct me if I'm wrong, but if you haven't dealt with the grief of that relationship ending, you're going to carry that grief into the next relationship, I would think. And it would express itself probably in weird ways. I don't know if I'm correct on that.
absolutely. It's the theme of, I'm a swimmer. So there was one time, I helped someone who was struggling in the Gulf of Mexico, and they tried to climb on me, and I had to push them away
Yeah.
and tell them sternly, do not come near me. I will come to you. Relax, relax. And so our instinct, when our life is falling apart, is
Yeah.
to jump on somebody else.
Yeah.
And that's survival. So the idea is to be working on those things with a process. So I went into personal counseling, and I was shocked the day my counselor said, okay, let's examine your part of why this marriage fell apart.
Whew.
And I was like, no, me,
Yeah. Yeah.
the mark of a good counselor. So that was hard.
Yeah.
I had to admit but again, the theme was acceptance, awareness, knowledge. Here's a pattern that I've done since I was a little boy. This manifested in this way in the relationship. This was not good. With the right partner, it would have been better.
Yeah.
But still, moving forward, hey, that's a blind spot. I need to watch that. I need to work on that. And so that's the idea. Rather than put a time frame on it, just be working on those things. But overall, if it's to, just jump into something to save yourself, it's not a good decision.
Yeah.
And so be working on your stuff. And interestingly, I just checked on this morning. The divorce rate continues to go down.
Really?
In America, yes. Since 2019, it's gone down even more, and into 2020, the trend is still the same. So part of, I'm an optimist. So part of what I see in that is, like we talked about those churches, thankfully, most of those churches now have care programs. They see it in a different way.
Yeah.
And also premarital counseling.
Yeah.
Has been something that's helped. And the counseling field in general has done a much better job of assisting families when they're in trouble. The stigma of mental health has gone down, so people are more likely to ask for help. So it's really interesting that that the divorce rate, even in the pandemic, they did a study that just came out. People are staying together.
Yeah.
So, I think that's really helpful to know.
I've seen that even in our church, with some people that have come to us and their marriages are falling apart. And it's like, I think sometimes people stay together because it's kind of like, okay, what am I going to do? Financially, I'd be ruined, the kids, all those things. And I don't always see that as a bad thing. Like if that's initially what's holding you together and then you go and get the help you need. Do you know what I'm saying? So it's not,
Right.
you're not as quick to bail. Maybe in the past we would have been faster to bail, but you're not as quick to bail. You're going to get the help you need. And then you're both going to move forward and heal. I think, just speaking honestly, and that's what I like to do on this podcast. It's a struggle for me sometimes to know when to tell someone cut and run or stay in it. You know what I'm saying? Because there's so many, it's such high stakes. And so I'll have friends. I did have one situation where, I had a friend and she called me and it was a bad situation and she had to get out. And I mean, that night I got her divorce lawyer and I was like, you need to get out. Like, here it is, go for it. I was sure in that moment that was a situation where she needed to be out of that situation. But then there's been other times where I'm like, dang, I don't know. I don't, no one, if it's a safety issue, it's like get out as fast as possible. If there's not a safety issue and I feel like there might be hope, there's part of me that's like, and so I think it's tricky. So maybe for a second, we're gonna go back to the blended families thing, but speak to those of us who have not gone through divorce. We're friends of people in struggling relationships and marriage. And at what point do we say, okay, like, I think it's time, or no, fight it out? Or should we not even be speaking into that? Should we just be silent? You know what I'm saying? Like, what's the role of a friend for someone who's walking through this?
Yeah, great question. Because the friend bears quite a burden. They're in their own marriages often.
Yeah.
So they know their little struggles, or big struggles.
Yeah.
And so they feel torn. They love their friend. They want their friend to be okay. And then there's all those other voices that come in with regards to how we were raised and, those things. So what helped me personally, and again, this was useful as I worked with individuals who were contemplating this or going through it. What I valued most in a friend was someone who could just hear me, who could help me put things into words, sift through the emotions, listening, reframing things. And then, it's often said that people kind of really know what they're going to do already.
Yep.
They don't need you to tell them.
Yeah.
But just doing things like a pros cons list, helping someone, especially if your friend is really emotional. Stress kills the ability of the brain to process. So when I'm fatigued cognitively, emotionally, it's hard for me to look at a bank statement with a rational eye.
Yeah.
So that's where a friend coming alongside to say, well, you just got pretty mad and said I should leave. What would that look like?
Yeah. Yeah.
If you did this, what do you see? That's where a friend can really be a guide and just help sift through and process those things.
Yeah. And I think, you and I talk about this a lot. I'm the compassionate warrior. So like when I have a friend that's struggling, I want to come in, I want to fix it, and then
yes,
I think for friends too, because I've had to walk through this with different friends, either friends who've gotten divorced, who've decided to stay. There's the initial panic of like, and you kind of mentioned this in the beginning, crap, what is this going to look like? Like, like my husband and I were both friends with this person, this couple. And so if they get divorced, what does that mean for our friendship? What is that? And I think as friends, sometimes we've got to lay that aside, like you said. And I think we just have to listen. We just have to be a sounding board and really think through, okay, it's almost like we get selfish, like I'm like thinking about it for myself, like, how's this going to affect me, instead of, no, this person is walking through pain right now. How can I help this person? So anyways,
great point.
I'm getting a little gut check here. Okay. So
Great
let's go
point.
back to blended families.
Yes. The blended family.
We don't have all day. don't want to take your time. So how do you, because you came in, so how do you broach that relationship with those, with, the new spouse's children? Do you rush in and try to like force it? Do you let it come to you?
Yeah,
How do you?
what's the formula?
Yeah, and there's not one. I'm sure you're going to say that. So how do you go about those relationships, and then not allowing your other kids to get jealous? Because is that a thing? Like,
That's a
you're,
thing.
yeah. So talk to us about this. It's a
Yeah.
thing.
And I have a real passion for blended families. It's kind of like where the brave dare not go. I mean, this is,
Yeah.
After the aftermath, and then, you take the plunge, you let your heart love again, you let yourself be loved. And now there's these other little people, these other kids in the mix, and your kids and everything. So a theme again is, with younger kids, play, relationship, and intentionality. So regular intervals of familiarity, letting the system, that little family that's already there, that person who I'm attaching to with their little unit, getting to know my unit, and play is the greatest vehicle for that with young kids, even with middle, teenagers, middle-aged children. That's a process of, you show character when you play, you figure out who someone is when you play, and things bubble to the surface. So the other thing is respect already established routines.
Okay.
So, the biggest problem with blended families is that let's say a man and a woman fall in love, they decide to blend. So
Yeah.
the wife keeps her house, and the husband, the new husband with his children, are going to, join that system. Well, let's say you baked a bunch of muffins, and you've got a container, and it's pretty full, but you're going to try to jam 2 more muffins in there, and things get squished.
Yeah.
It's that same idea. So one of the biggest cause of problems is when that new person comes in and goes, here's how we're doing it. We're going to do it this way. And there's already a system of, chores, routines, schedules. So for that new person coming in, whether it's a new husband, new wife, to see what's working well, and then where can I join in, and think of just creating spaces for that. And one of the ways to do that is through having these, I call them family meetings.
Okay.
And the idea of a policy and procedure manual, not that, point A1,
Yeah.
but the idea that if this happens, here's how we're going to handle it.
Yeah.
Noticing that your youngest is having a hard time with us dating. Did you notice that? Yeah, I noticed that. There was some comments, or, and we don't even have time today to get into the outside forces of, the former spouse, the former family of the spouse, lot of energy that can really just cause a lot of rough water.
Yeah.
But the theme of, if this happens, here's how we're going to handle it. And then having regular family meetings where each person has a voice. I worked for years at the Florida Baptist Children's Home. We had 8 kids from all different backgrounds in a cottage. And every night we had a little family meeting where every kid had their chance to say what they share, something, ask a question. And then the leaders, which this establishes the new parents, the new parental unit as the leaders, could say, here's what we've got planned this week. Here's what we're going to be doing. And again, when children respond well, for them to grow, they need to be able to see and expect what's coming. That's why routine is so key in a child's development. Yes, we also need to teach them, hey, sometimes the schedule doesn't work.
Yeah.
But for the most part, and so very quickly there's this reassurance that when I go to dad's with his new wife, here's how things are going to go, and here's how
Mm-hmm.
she is, and here's how we work things together. So in the blending, planning,
Mm.
um, it baffles me how when you start a company, you plan. I mean, you plan beyond planning. And
Yeah.
then with our families, we just, we're
Yeah.
going to wing it. Hope it all works out,
Yeah. Yeah.
roll those dice.
Yeah.
So and you can get too rigid with the planning, but the overall theme is that you communicate and talk about if this happens. For instance, when I came into my blended world, there was a ready-made teenager,
Yeah.
and then one just about to be a teenager. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Whew.
right. And
Yeah.
then these two little girls in a
Yeah.
home where there hadn't been girls before, and how's this going to fly? And so again, staying in the relationship, staying in communication, and just handling one thing at a time, not trying to change too much too quick,
Mm.
and honoring the child's journey. I think that's
Mm.
something else, and like I've helped kids in counseling with their parents' divorce, just make a little story
Yeah.
of, this is the story of my family.
Hmm.
And so it just helps to do those things when you're in that blending stage.
I think like some of the words you've been saying over and over again, like communicate, respect, being in the moment, taking it as it like creating a plan, but then also just taking it as it comes and not. I think when you create a plan, you can be in the moment because you're like, you don't have to fear if this happens, what am I going to do? I have a plan. If this happens, I know what I'm going to do. So I can be focused in the moment. I can respect, myself, my children, this new spouse, their children, and just communicate, and making sure the kids have a safe place to know that they're going to be heard. I think, as I'm listening to you, those are the themes that I'm hearing over. So, all right, last and final questions will be a great way to end. Talk to us about the plan. You said creating a plan if you're about to get divorced or if you're walking through divorce, a plan, a care plan. What would that look like?
Sure. If you think of I call them pillars
Okay.
that make up who we are. We have our spiritual self. We have the cognitive part of us, the emotional part of us, the physical part of us, and the relational part of us. And so, in a well-rounded theoretical model, we're feeding into those each day. We're
Yeah.
giving nourishment to each one, a little bit here and there. And so evaluating yourself and how am I doing?
Mm,
Where's my spiritual nourishment? Well, often when you've been white knuckling it through trying to save a marriage, you'll notice that the faith aspect is often not
mm,
shoved aside on purpose, but you just don't have the energy.
yeah.
And so evaluating each of those things, my friendships, who am I not talking to? Who have I kind of isolated myself from?
Mm,
The divorce process is a very lonely, isolative world.
mm,
And so, and that's one of the problems with people suffering in general, is
mm,
they isolate. So,
yeah.
um, so that's the idea of the plan, looking at each of those areas and saying, hey, I'm letting negative thinking really rule me. I
Mm,
need to ground myself to the truth of this. Here's what I've done. Here's what I've tried. The emotional side, letting yourself grieve,
mm,
letting yourself take some time to release some of those feelings of loss.
yeah.
And then physically, uh, what do we usually neglect when life gets stressful? We eat poorly,
Yep.
and we don't sleep,
Yep.
and we stop exercising.
Yes.
And what does research show that we really need to do most of all? Eat well,
Eat.
sleep,
Yeah.
and move.
Yeah.
Not spend 5 hours at a gym. Just movement, just
Yeah.
walking, just stretching, just these simple things. So that's the idea. When it's coming, when
Mm,
you're going to go through it. And then part of the relationship piece is adding intentional relationship with friends, with communicating to people who can take care of you and help. And
mm,
then with your children, if you have children in the process, being able to intentionally spend time in relationship around them.
I love it. Is there anything else that I mean, this is such a loaded thing. We're probably going to have to do a part 2 to this, but is there anything as we're closing that you just are like, man, this has been on my heart. I want to make sure people know this just as we close. This has been so good. Oh, are you there? I'm like, oh, there you are. You froze for just a second. So I was like,
oh, okay.
Just as we're closing. Okay. What did you say? Oh, and you froze again. Come back to me. There we are.
One part that people.
There you are.
Is that better?
Yep. We're together. Okay. Good grief. Cast the demons out of this internet. Boundaries. Okay.
One part that people often don't think of in good self-care is boundaries. And so setting boundaries for yourself. I'm not going to think those negative thoughts. I'm not going to, for instance, a common scenario is you've waited to see your kids, you finally pick them up, they come in and start telling you about places they've been and things they've done where you don't want them to be or do.
Yeah. Yikes.
In that space, I can't do anything about that. I feel anger, I feel resentment and betrayal. But right now, my boundary is I'm going to be with my kids in this moment. I'll compartmentalize that for later. And then setting boundaries with other family members or, discerning who's really here for me, who's really here to help me, or who's here to just judge me and criticize me, and feeling brave enough and strong enough to cut those people out of your life if you can.
Yeah.
Because it's about efficiency. What's best for me, my children, who's pouring into me with the love of God, who's able to tell me tough stuff, but do it in a loving way. And there's a difference between that and just simple judgment. So and setting boundaries.
You've talked to me about that before too. Like when I've walked through the trauma of losing my brother and stuff, and like, okay, what relationships do I need to keep right now? What do I not keep? And, you've addressed with me when you're, emotionally being depleted by the trauma you're walking through, you don't have any emotional energy left to take care of people who need to be, like you almost have to be selfish for a little bit, and surround yourself with those people that don't need your time and attention, the people that can, self-care for themselves so they can take care of you so that you're not depleting yourself even more, I don't know if you froze there. We're just having all sorts of issues right here at the end. But anyways, are you with me? There you are. Did you hear what I said? I'm like right at the end. It's all going through. Anyways, well, I appreciate this, Kevin. Thank you so much for even including some of your personal side of things. I know that helps people because hearing from someone who's walked through it and walked through it well is so important. But okay, now what's going on? I've completely lost my internet. Come on. Hang with.
There you are.
There we go. Okay. I was saying, I know this is the time to end it then. I was saying, thanks so much for sharing your story and just encouraging us with it and being open and honest and vulnerable. So, but guys, thank you so much for tuning in. We will have Kevin again. And then in a couple of weeks, I'll be interviewing Toni Newhoff. She was a former divorce attorney. She wrote the book Before You Split. So that'll be fun to talk to her a little bit about some of this as well. But a great resource I like to give people is Lisa Turkis's book, Forgiving What You Can't Forget. And so I think that would be a blessing to a lot of you potentially walking through this. But Kevin, thanks again. We appreciate it.
Yes, thank you, Nicole.
And guys, don't forget to check out NicoleGolden.org. Have a great day.
All right.